With that brief opening remark, I would like to call upon stage the first panel, and I would like to call Kosturi Ghosh, the last year's Will Power of the Year Award recipient, and she will be actually heading this panel and moderating it. I would like to call Saugata Chakravarthy, the General Counsel of Siemens, Sandhya Vishal, Chief Counsel of Nielsen, and Navneet Hrishikesan, Director and Head Service Provider Legal Asia Pacific and Japan for Cisco. As you can see, we have an excellent panel which has got multi-jurisdictional issues, and also the challenge of running the legal department. As you can see from the topic, it's about identifying not only the X factor, the Y factor, and the Z factor. Let's see what the panel does. And please join me in giving the panel a big hand. Over to you, Kosturi.
Thank you. Morning. I'm assuming that everyone can hear me. So we are all here to this morning to talk about the whole X, Y, and Z. Now this means different things to different people. It'll be, of course, good to hear your views. We'll certainly be asking the panelists here what they think. But as Vikas was saying this morning, the role of the GC in India and of course across the world has changed greatly. When I started to practice, I remember most companies that I dealt with, we would deal with the CFO. There would be no question of having an in-house team. And now, of course, we're looking at analysts who are leading people with 35, 40 lawyers. In some cases, have transcended law and started to do some other things. So I'll do a quick intro of each of you, and because that will kind of set the stage in terms of the discussion that we will have. So Saugata is GC with Siemens. You look after the South Asia region. You are also on the board of various companies. Your main areas of work are on the contracting, claims management side, compliance, and company secretariat. Sure, that takes up a lot of your time. Sandhya is Chief Counsel and Integrity Leader. That's quite an interesting title. And you do a lot of work with the South Asia leadership team, as I can understand. You're also on the Ombudsman and the compliance side for the company. Now, Navneet is our lawyer, but non-lawyer for the purposes of this panel. He is part of Cisco's global service provider segment, and in this respect, he leads Cisco's teams in Australia, New Zealand, Japan, ASEAN, India, and other SAARC regions. He's once again on the board of various Cisco companies, and therefore has a unique perspective to bring to this panel. So with that, let me get started. Let me throw this open to the two lawyers right now on this panel. What is the traditional role of a GC looking like now? Has it changed? Are you still doing a lot of work as a GC? Or do you spend your time kind of splitting up the traditional legal role versus the new roles that GCs are constantly being expected to explore? Saugata, if you want to go first.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. And it's a sort of a very wide question which you put across, Kosturi, on the table. When you say what is the role of a general counsel as a traditional general counsel, I do not understand this question in a sense that there's no role which is like a traditional and a non-traditional role. It's what you perform and what you take up and what you assume as your responsibility in an organization. What I personally feel is in an organization, at the level which you are at the general counsel is a general management role. It happened to be that you are a lawyer and you know law. And that's the beginning of the topic when we are getting back to our subject headline known as the General Counsel plus XYZ. And this XYZ has to be defined for you as a person and as an organization, keeping the shape as what you define XYZ for yourself. And that's where it starts. The topic which comes across is, as a general management, you are not only good in your own vertical, but also then you have a full T-structure management and you know how to collaborate amongst different functions. You are coming across as a project manager because everything you do is like a project. You handle crisis, you handle elements of labor laws, you handle elements of any other facets which is actually impacting the organization. So repeating back your question, I don't see there is any traditional role and a non-traditional role. I see this as a general management role.
Right.
So I have a sort of I mean, pretty similar to what Saugata says, but I think the role or the XYZ is not something that is sort of cast in stone, and it is something that really, really evolves, and unfortunately at today's world evolving at a very fast pace because there's cost pressure and there are multiple challenges from the business. So today, the way the business and the leadership looks to you is, are you first of all, of course, you have to be the trusted advisor. Then there's also this facet of being a risk manager, and above all, you have to be a business enabler. So and I think like Saugata sort of pointed out, the XYZ, that's of course a broader element of what XYZ is, but it's also the fact that what you do is stretched so much. I mean, like the fact, like I do, for example, I can talk about the work that I do, which is the role of a chief counsel, but also one of like an integrity leader or the ombudsman. And because we are a very data heavy company, I mean, at least bulk of my time is goes there, and and then what you do is in terms of remedial actions, and you're supposed to be dispensing justice at the end of the day. So I mean, it's a fair, it's a fairly sort of big ask, and I'm kind of settling into the role yet. I mean, in all fairness. So like I said, I mean, XYZ is something which is evolving, and
sure.
That's my perspective.
So Navneet, from your perspective, kind of having been and worn the lawyer hat for some time, what is it that you've seen as being transcendental for you to be able to move into this new role that you have? Where do you see your lawyer side of it sort of coming to the fore? Is that even something that you think about, given the position that you are in right now?
Sure. Yeah. No. Absolutely. I think so. So the way we work is we are focused on a certain segment of our business, right? Which is about $8 billion for APJC as a region. And what we do is, what we have tried to do in the recent past, so all our lawyers who work for me, what we have tried to do over time is try to figure out what is it actually that you want your lawyers to be, right? Is it compliance? Is it an ombuds kind of role? What are the other aspects you want? And to a certain extent, I think it goes back to the Bar Council and the way they have treated us in-house lawyers, right? At least for India. We are not advocates, right? You're not lawyers. So how do you really make sure you have a seat at the table? The way we did that is to actually go down the business route, right? So when we talk about Cisco as a business, we looked at what do our lawyers need to be, right? So there are two aspects to it. One is we looked at certain key traits we want them to have, right? And it's about a 5-letter acronym. I will just pick on 2 or 3 of them, right? So one is, the first thing we said we want our lawyers to be is inquisitive, and that's short form for business knowledge, right? We want you to go and understand what your business is all about. Are you able to read the balance sheet, maybe, right? Are you sitting in on your business leaders' meetings? Are you part of the group that goes and discusses it? The logic being that you will land up giving advice with a legal twist, as opposed to being the pure lawyer sitting and doing compliance in the corner of the room, right? The second part that we said we need to have in there is drive, right? How do I define drive? I think there was this very interesting, every year Jeff Bezos, the Amazon CEO, sends a letter to his shareholders, and he sent one recently, I think last week. He talks about the velocity of a decision, right? And he's basically talking about the need to be fast, the need to have a bias for action. I think he divided it out by saying you may not have 90% of the information you want, but you need to be able to take a decision on the 70%, and sometimes you fail. And I think as lawyers, that's difficult for us to take risk, right? But we push our people to do it. So sometimes just enough is good enough. Go ahead and do it. You will not have all the answers in the world. The final piece that among the 5 that we have, and the last one that I will try and focus a bit more on is called team, right? And the reason we put team in there is collaboration is important, right? In an in-house environment, you do not want a prima donna. That said, you need to be able to lead. So Chuck, who is our CEO now, at that time was the head of sales for us in Cisco, basically said at one event for lawyers, he said, the key thing I want everybody to do is to lead before the org structure allows you to do so, right? It's a very interesting perspective. It's very easy for me to direct my lawyers around if I'm the boss. How do I make sure the finance guys come with me? How do I make sure the tax guys come with me? How do I make sure the ops guys come with me? So I think from a core perspective, we've tried to move it there. And the reason we do it, to put it very mildly, there are 2 reasons why we do it, right? So one is the personal safety mechanism, right? I think over time, you're going to find a situation where, like it's happening to law firms today, nobody's willing to give you headcount for junior lawyers to learn on the job and do, NDAs. Let's take NDAs as an example. My lawyers don't touch NDAs. Why? Because we automated it. It's cheaper for me to have paralegals do the work in Krakow, in Poland, than it's for me to have a corporate counsel or a senior corporate counsel do it in Bangalore, right? So we got rid of that. We are moving RFPs over there. And we're talking about artificial intelligence and the like coming in. We'll see. Right now it's all code and it's fancy words. But at some stage it's going to reach a point where you're not going to have, you don't have the normal stuff that we all did, the grunt work we all did when we started off, right? That's going to go away. So what is it that really makes you safe? Relationships. You have a relationship with your client, and I mean client as in your internal business leader, whoever it is. You know what the business is all about. You're able to give advice which is context driven. No machine is going to take your job, okay? So that's where we are, I think, in my view, is where we are going. We're going to have smaller teams, senior people, experienced people. And the other piece that why we say we want you to do it is because without that piece, you will struggle, right? You might as well be with all due respect, might as well be a part of a law firm, right? There is no real benefit coming to the business from that perspective. And sticking with the law firm theme, in-house counsels are the best fixed fee arrangement in the world.
Yeah.
Right? You got a salary, you got a budget, and frankly the budget, at least in my case, 90% of it is salary, right, of my people. There'll be a little travel, there'll be a little something else. You have to manage everything that comes up in your region using that same set of rupees or dollars, right? So what should be your drive? Your drive should be efficiency, right? And how do you become more efficient at what you do? You become more efficient by having influence. And how do you build that influence? By showing the business that you are relevant, that you are important in there, right? I can play around with my budget a bit. Maybe I will delay patent filing, I will delay some litigation, I might settle something, You can play around with a bit of it, but really speaking, you don't run a P&L, right? It's a budget, it's a fixed number of dollars. And therefore we push our lawyers to be more engaged, right? And to reach a stage where the business guys will actually ask you for advice on non-legal issues. I spend maybe 70% of my time on non-legal issues. Could be operations, could be business-related issues, business development and the like. And I prefer it that way. It keeps it interesting.
Yeah. I think
Sorry,
that's
long-
right. I
long
think
answer.
Navneet, summed up the entire panel for us. We can all go home now.
Can we go now?
Yeah, I think
So just going back to one of the points that you were making on teams and the efficiency, you were saying that your team is a decentralized one.
Yep.
Can you explain why you went about that concept and how is that yielding good measure for
value
you?
add. I call it value add.
Value add, absolutely.
Right. let me put it like this. Let me bring things to context first. And you read out that I am responsible for ABCD. It's the ABCD of the topic. The point is, it's not me who is responsible, it's the legal function who is responsible for these, by the way. The topic actually comes across governance, which is the company secretariat, and compliance is pure governance role. Then we have developed a contracts and claims management because we are a engineering and project driven company. So these are the two different roles which we are talking about, and we have the traditional sort of the lawyering, which is the legal counsel also. So this is what the facet which we are handling as of date in legal. The topic comes across is whether it's important to have people all sitting in one room and doing their own stuff, as you were pointing out, or whether it is important that these people know what goes on a practical basis. So we have devised a methodology which says that we should know what business does. We should have our legal expertise. The two elements, which is what is our knowledge, what we know, we should be using that one, and what the market practice. So this is like a cycle. So when you build everything in this cycle, then you will understand that it's not that the lawyer sitting in a room can actually effectively use all those data points. And therefore, it is imperative that these people are sitting at the sales at where things happen. And the contracts and the claims management are sitting at the projects in the container of the project with the people who are actually handling the project business. The people who are sweating and people who are going into the mines and drilling, and they need to understand the pulse of it. And then you come across and understand what the basic philosophy of lawyering is at that juncture, whether it makes sense or not. Because you are not a traditional lawyer, you are not an external counsel, and you're just not an advisor. You are a business partner. And I would put it like this, that moving from business partner to business enabler is only a 5% gap. And that travel actually takes the maximum time.
That's right.
So that's exactly why I have asked all my team to be decentralized and be next to the business partner. Coming back to the point is, can everybody be really on the shop floor? No, somebody will have to have a strategic view. So keeping that in mind, the leads of these teams are sitting with the division management in their office space, and they are at the business review meetings. And then I personally, I am an invitee to the board of Siemens Limited. So that's how we have structured it entirely. So, you know, that gives the pulse, that gives the knowledge, that gives the proximity, and that gives the understanding of the market. And then you complete the entire cycle. So that's how we have built it up.
I think you make a very important point on the fact that does everybody actually want to be there, right? So, you know, lawyers being the kind of people that we are, we'll all like to stick together and sit in one room and kind of have the ability to talk law with other people. So Sandhya, what's sort of been your experience having worked with ANZ? Now you're with Nielsen. How do you see the the roles changing, your ability to motivate your team to be able to grow beyond just being a lawyer?
So I'll talk a bit about the current structure that I'm in. So like I said, I manage legal and integrity, and it's called integrity leader, but it's actually the ombudsman function. And also I manage compliance, so it's actually 3 roles into one. So clearly we don't have such large teams. I have around 2 people who work with me on the legal side of things, and 2 people who work with me in integrity. But the way we work about is there's a very strong security team in Nielsen. So we sort of partner with them to get our goals in compliance and integrity. To achieve the goals in compliance and integrity, we work with them. But on the legal side, of course, we manage things internally. And very similar to Saugata, I'm also an invitee to the board, take a very active role in the the leadership meetings, and because of the, and I think because of the ombudsman function that I do, I think there's a very good visibility into what's really gone wrong. I just want to sort of elaborate a bit on the ombudsman program. Nielsen, because it's a data heavy company, we've got a very strong, like a whistleblower program, and we often see a lot of instances of data tampering and issues that sort of come to forefront. So you need expertise of different kinds to investigate those matters, and which is why we have a robust security team. But eventually that all their advice or whatever rolls up into you, and then it's for you to finally give the recommendation and see what needs to be done. It's interesting because some of it could be very related to like data, some of it could be actually HR has a very strong HR interplay in it, which relates to disciplinary actions and harassment, and that's actually honestly the human element is a tougher part of it always.
Yeah, sure.
The other elements are sort of you can put a blinkers on and go ahead. The human element is always the tougher part to deal with, and then there are unfortunately issues of bigger magnitude. So so yeah, like I said, we rely a lot on like a support function from teams like security and all of that as well. I don't know if that sort of
No, that's great. I think it's good because the more we talk, we kind of realize how just being a lawyer in the traditional sense, and what you were saying is no longer the need of the hour. The need of the hour is to not just be a lawyer who knows vast and various types of law, but also how to apply that within the context of each of the roles that you are playing.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if I can sort of just stretch a bit more, I mean, so the compliance role of things is actually where you're actually responsible for the the code of conduct, and like where you're responsible for a lot of training activities. So I guess because of the breadth of the role, you're able to influence the tone that the leadership will set for the company. So I guess that's a great benefit. Of course, it can be argued whether it's too much in one or whether there's a conflict and all of that. But I guess it sort of gives you the ability to influence and shape a lot of things for at least to set the tone at the top.
Right. So I mean, from the perspective that I see, and I'm happy to be the person to stand away from the rest of you. I think the compliance function is one that typically should not lie with the GC, because I personally think that it could lead to a conflict of interest in terms of how the function is perceived, how well the function is doing is perceived as well. You guys have any thoughts to offer? Navneet, let's start with you. Yeah.
So, well, I think it really depends which country you are speaking to, right? I mean, to a certain extent. So if I talk to my GC in India or the GC in China, we have seen a tendency to over-rotate on compliance, right? Less so in Australia, less so in the other more, shall I say, less risky regions. You'll find the same thing happening in Europe. The guys in Africa are probably more worried about it. I think compliance, let me put it this way, right? And I think I know the reason why you're asking me this question. What I told Kosturi earlier is, wanting to do compliance as a main part of your job, right? Or I want to be a GC so I can do compliance is, in my humble opinion, a bit like wanting to become a father so you can change diapers, right? Is it a necessary piece of the job description as a father to change diapers? Yes. If you don't do it properly, there will be a stink. But I have 2 kids. I have never woken up in the morning and said, oh yes, I get to change a diaper today, right? So there are other reasons you're going in there. And so part of the thing what we did as a function is we went back, and that's my personal view, right? There are others who disagree with me, obviously, and they're encouraged to disagree with me. But what we basically did was we went back and looked at the work we do, right? So fundamentally, and again, your answer might be different depending on which industry you are in. If you are in a highly regulated space, you may have a different perspective on this issue. But we went back and we looked at the work we do, and we basically, kind of did a core versus context review. And we looked at it from a perspective of, at one axis is risk, higher the risk, what do you do with it? The other context was competitive advantage, right? So if I do this, will it give me a competitive advantage? Now, I don't think there's any company in the world which will have a competitive advantage because it has a better compliance program, right? It's a risk part that really covers it. And that you could put litigation into it, you could look at employee issues, and based on that, we broke it down, right? And we said, okay, these things will always be in-house. Negotiations, commercial deals, right? Antitrust issues. We will always look at that in-house. Employment, maybe outsource it completely. Risk, compliance, litigation, maybe I'll out-task it, so I don't hire people to do it for me, but I will engage a law firm or I'll engage depending on where I am, right? And so we tried breaking it down, but I do realize that the reason it works for us is because Cisco's legal department and legal law departments in the US in general are highly developed, right? I started in one of my first jobs was in Wipro. At that time, typical story, right? Report to the CS, who reports to the CFO, right? You're not considered to be anything. We built the department up from scratch. We made sure that we were relevant, go through the commercial angle, whatever it is. Now, when each organization is at its own level of development, and I think in some cases, it may be worthwhile for the GC to actually go out there and grab more stuff, because it makes you more relevant. The idea is to make your function more relevant. So just as lawyers develop over time and you go through your own perspective on risk, I would suggest that it depends really where your organization is in its journey. I do think compliance needs to be with legal, or you need to have some view on it.
Sure.
I just don't want it to be what I do every day.
Yeah.
I can
Sandhya,
go
yeah.
first.
Please.
So I'm just going to extend your diaper analogy here, and I'm just and my
As
perspective
you can
is
see,
that
I'm improving the conversation that's happening here.
my perspective is that who better than the father to clean the diaper. So I mean, I'm just in that context, who better than the lawyer to do the role. But again, I want to sort of I think there is, again, it's not a one size fit all. It really depends on the industry and the sector you operate in. And I mean, of course, earlier I used to be with financial services, and clearly, I mean, there it's so regulated. There is a clear need for a compliance officer, to have that independence and be completely away from the the legal side of things. But where I am right now, and I think it's purely based on the need of the industry and the sector you operate in. Where I am right now, I guess it's a very logical extension, and this is the way Nielsen globally is sort of structured, that the lawyer, the regional counsel as we are called, the regional counsel has the responsibility of ombudsman and compliance. And I can see why it fits well, because like I said earlier, right, by virtue of your ombudsman role, you get a very, very close insight into what really went wrong. And I think it's a natural extension is to have the compliance role, because then you can really partner with various stakeholders in business to put things right. I mean, you may not be responsible for financial controls or whatever, but at least you can give them the direction that, listen, but this is what went wrong, this is what should have happened in in operations or whatever. So you're really able to stretch that. And I think more importantly, I think when you're talking about, and I've seen this personally, and when you're out there giving training or whatever, you're able to really relate to a lot of real life examples, right, telling them that this is what went wrong, and this is actually the violation in a in a code of conduct, and this is why we need to put this process or policy in place. So I guess it's very, very dependent on the sector and the industry you operate in. And like I said, I mean, if someone has to do the role, I guess the legal counsel is best suited to do the role, in my humble opinion.
Sure. So,
Saugata,
sure. You have a different view, or
Not a different view.
You're not on my side or this one.
No, I think it's two sides of the same coin, right? You cannot really really differentiate between what is lawyering and what is compliance. It's like you're talking about you're a lawyer but not following an Advocates Act, by the way, an ethics topic. Yeah? Yep. So it's something like that. I mean, if you really dissect the entire topic of compliance, what are we talking about actually? If it is ethics, you cannot go without the basic law. Absolutely. On that one. If you are talking about data privacy, antitrust and things like that, you really cannot go without the basics of the law. Then if you are moving ahead and saying that I would like to have investigations and things like that and something which is coming across, can you do it without the lawyering ability? So therefore, I don't see that this is like completely different, but it may be together, it may not be together, that's a separate debate altogether. In Siemens, what we have, we call it legal and compliance. So it's like we are together, we operate, the operations part is done somewhere else, the legal topic is done somewhere else. So there are lawyers who do compliance, and there are operation compliance people who do real-time operations. Like investigation is completely independent, but if there is a requirement of a legal opinion, it comes back to legal and compliance, legal cell for that one. So we keep that independence, and at the end of the day, we talk about that this is single team. It cannot be like, you cannot say that this is separate and this is separate. I mean, I personally feel no, that's not the case. It's two sides of the same coin.
Same coin. Okay.
I just want to
sure.
extend a bit on the investigation point he touched upon, and like I said again, we have an independent security or investigations team, but they also, there's a chief security officer who also rolls up into the CLO. But the point is exactly like the way Saugata mentioned, most of the times they have independence, I mean they do the investigations on their own, but there are times when the lawyer is looped in because they're not that close to the business, they don't, you know, they're not otherwise interfacing with the business the way we do. So sometimes we are brought in, you know, and I've sat through some investigations to just bring that perspective and, you know, just for the, you know, the judgment. So I just wanted to
Sure.
you know, add
No, I
that
think
facet
that,
as well.
that makes a lot more sense than to just say that, you know, that the legal team is responsible for compliance end to end, because
Yeah.
that's where I think there could potentially be a conflict of
yes.
interest in terms of how those investigations are, because then you're sort of investigating
yeah.
yourself at
Yes,
the end of the day,
absolutely.
and that is always going to be a tricky part. So, you know, let's move on a little bit more. So, reading there's a KPMG study which was done in 2016, and it interviewed CEOs and various people from the C-suite who sort of wanted to give their opinion on what are the aspects of GCs that they would like to see. They mentioned 5 key things. One was a business leader, the second is a risk manager, the third is a technology champion, fourth is a key communicator, and 5 is the builder of corporate culture. So, you know, if we could take business leader as the first thing that we discussed, because, you know, we've spoken about this, you know, you guys are not just lawyers who also know a little bit about the business, but actually businessmen who just happen to be lawyers at the end of the day. So, Ghosh, what's been your experience in terms of making the journey? What skill sets have you acquired? How have you gotten yourself, you know, the skills and the ability to become a business leader?
I would say it's not me only.
Of course.
It's the organization who wants you to be at that level. And let me put it this way, I should say thank you to Siemens in this forum as well, because when I assumed the role of the general counsel, the first thing the company did for me is to send me for an advanced management course. And that opened a lot of it was like an eye-opener. It gave me a view saying that lawyering is one thing, and being advanced managers are completely different. Then you try to get into a situation where it's psychology, where it's human relations, then you develop ethics and compliance, and then, I mean, all sorts of different sorts of facets. Then after 2 to 3 years, I also went to the general management course, which was a complete, like, it was a different level altogether. And then the entire journey actually developed at each stage, and it doesn't come in a day. And you don't assume the role upfront when you're walking into the chair, sitting down on the chair. It doesn't come like that. What it happens is each element on a day-to-day basis gives you a bit of an experience. And that experience shows you how to handle situation and make you like a project manager. And deliberately I'm using this word like a project manager, because here the question is, whenever there is a crisis, be it in HR topic, be it in business investigation, be it in dawn raid or antitrust or anything, or could be anything, you will see my realization is when I sit back and imagine, it's like a Venn diagram, right? So crisis A, crisis B, crisis C, and then there is this common spot which is known as legal. Yeah, so everywhere you get involved, and that is exactly the experience which makes you a general manager, and that's why I call it a project management. First topic on that one comes across in terms is everybody knows that as lawyers we understand that the perception of threat is much higher than the actual part of the threat, right?
That's what we all want people to believe, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's what you want to believe, and that becomes a problem for the in-house lawyers to manage. So that's the first crisis management. The first hour of crisis management actually comes across on the topic of that, saying that how do you manage perception versus reality? And that's where your actual skills comes out, and that's what you need to develop. At the same time, we need to realize that we are not Harry Potters of the world, right? We do not have a magic wand.
Sure.
The reality will hit, and the rubber will hit the ground. There will be friction. There will be topics where people will not agree to you. At that juncture, you need to be strong and stand up for it. You need to stand up for your values. You need to stand up for your ethics. You need to stand up for compliance. You need to stand up for that. And that actually what makes the change. And it happens, it's a journey. It starts when you actually assume the role, and then over a period of time, you grow over it. And I think that's exactly what my company has given me. I spent around 5 years now in the same role. I think it completely changed the outlook. So
Sure.
I'll leave it there.
Excellent. Okay. So Sandhya, from your perspective, you deal with data, and data is one thing that we know is perceptible to so much risk, and there's cybersecurity, the whole breach of privacy. How do you deal with this issue of crisis management? How do you, what in your role as a GC do you tell your teams to be ready for?
Good question.
Besides
So-
having my phone number, of course.
Yeah, so I think a bit like what Saugata spoke about, right? I mean, one really needs to, first of all, sit back and think that, I mean, crisis management is a very, very broad word, right? So, I mean, it can be, I think I would want to look at it as something as, is it an emergency, or is it, I mean, is it just an incident? I mean, that, probably you can sort of just sit down and, resolve. I guess as a role of a general counsel, I mean, you are obviously the gatekeeper, and if something happens, it first, hits you. Just two sides of things I'll touch upon. One is as a company, what you really need to have, and I think any good company and any MNC will have a very strong incident response plan in terms of what happens and who are the stakeholders, and as a general counsel, you play a very strong role in not just I mean, you have to, of course, safeguard and all of that, but it's very important in terms of the communication that goes out and what is the direction that the incident is actually now going to take. So you play a very, very collaborative role with other stakeholders in terms of what is the course this whole thing is going to take. Second is, I think the softer side of things, I think very important that you have to give the assurance or whatever, I mean, to the extent possible that look, it will get resolved to the extent, So it's actually being there, for the company, and then making sure that we'll try and sort of find a solution to this. But more importantly, I think it's very important for companies to have a very strong incident response plan, and we see this very often. Like you said, it's a data heavy company. We see all kinds of incidents
Sure.
that happen, media exposure, and I think it's up to you to ally the stakeholders and then make sure that you sort of steer the course of direction it takes. So that's the way I would look at it.
So Navneet, from your perspective, the GC as a key communicator, you were mentioning that you were responsible for hiring certain GCs in different geographies. How important is this role? Is communication truly, one of the key facets that a GC needs to have, or is it adequate for him to be able to, to step in and be that point of the intersection in the Venn diagram, or does he need to be a communicator from the beginning?
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. So it's From my perspective, it's kind of counterintuitive, right? So you are trained through your educational years and probably in the beginning of your career to actually think every issue through and write a detailed memo which puts down all the aspects of the whole thing, right? And then you reach a certain stage, it's a bit like old age, right? So suddenly it hits you and you are suddenly told that, give me 3 lines which explain to me why this is a big problem in so-and-so jurisdiction, right? That's a change that does not happen overnight. It's also, I find, an extremely difficult task, right? Was it Mark Twain who said, sorry, I'm writing you a long letter because I didn't have enough time, right, to make it shorter. It's an expertise that you learn, right? And I think we are working hard to train our lawyers to figure out how to do it. So I actually give them I have my own template and I say, this is what I use, identify the issue, background, what the core issue is, what your recommendation is. Because when you're communicating to the C-suite, 2 things. One, they don't have time to sit and listen to you drone on and on about how problematic it is. They want 1 line, right? Second, never go there without a recommendation. Okay, so don't come to me with problems, come to me with solutions. And you might have 3, 4 recommendations, like you could do this or this or this or this, and that's fine. But it's an absolute no-no for you to go there and say, drone on for 3 hours and say, oh my God, this is a problem, oh, this is also a problem, and that's also a problem, and now I don't know what to do, right? That's really not where you want to go. So I think that's a piece that we keep trying to push down their throats and say, it's counterintuitive for us as a training, right? It's difficult for us. You'll also find situations where people will question you because lawyers, right?
Of course,
you tend to go back and question them and say, have you thought of this and have you thought of that? And as long as you have an answer there, I think the communication piece needs to be critical. And let me also put it this way. Salespeople, engineers, ops guys, not really the best communicators in the world, okay? I mean, sales guys maybe, yeah, but then they probably tend to over-rotate on why it's a great thing, why they should, do it. So many times you'll find in my role, somebody wants to go to the CEO and say something or go to the customer and say something. It's a lawyer helping them draft it, right? And make it simple and clarify it and everything else. So we do focus on it a fair bit. I think it's one of our key requirements to be a leader in Cisco. Right?
And I think the communication aspect, like you were saying, is relevant not just with the C-suite, but also your stakeholders being either the board or shareholders, all of the employees. And in your case, acting as a bit of a mediator to be able to resolve 2 different points of view. So in terms of the position that the GC has with the board, should GCs be on boards, or should GCs have a dotted line to the board? Which is the better view? Because one, the first one sort of, in my mind, kind of takes away the independence of the GC function, but the move in the US is that GCs are joining boards a lot more, whereas in UK and other countries, I think they're invited to the meetings to be able to have a thorough understanding, but not necessarily join the board per se. Your views would be, it'd be good to hear that. You want to go, Saugata?
Yeah, the point is, let me take a practical scenario right here. We are operating in Indian Companies Act, right? And the moment we say that, I mean, there are a lot of topics which comes across in the head. Not getting into the act per se right now in this discussion, the point is you are right. There could be conflict of interest situations. There could be situations where you already have a company secretary who handles the board and gives the company law facade of it. And that's where the role is there. But do you really, the question that comes, do you really also need a general counsel sitting there? I mean, either on the board or as an invitee on the board. The topic comes across that is strategic. And that is a little different from the role which is directly played either in the board as a board member or as a company secretary, because both are lawyers at the end of the day, the corporate law topics. Yeah. The general counsel's role is like a business manager. He sees it, he understands, gives a perspective, and puts the opportunities of law forward. And that's exactly what we need to exploit, the opportunities of law. And and it's a role which cannot happen, for my understanding, being a full board member. Yeah. Then you are completely struck and bound how things would be, whether you have taken absolutely perfect decision or not. And it cannot also happen if you are a non-executive director on the board, because the non-executive director's role is also getting defined day by day. And that's exactly, we have to see that dynamics, right? And it depends completely in what type of the strategic environment you are playing and what is the maturity level of the organization is at the end of the day. So American jurisdiction or US jurisdiction is a little different, and UK is even different. We know our Germany has got two-tier board system. It's completely different. Now, Japanese Kiritsu system is again a completely different system. So we need to take all these facets, and you cannot have like one size fit all. Like it has to be case-to-case basis. Just there, being there, doing the right thing is important. And what is more important is doing the right thing. And that can be whether either you are on the board or outside the board or anywhere. Even if you are an invitee, you can always put your point forth and do the right thing. I think that's more important.
Sure.
Yeah, so I think it's important to see what's the objective out here. I think the objective is that you want the board to have full visibility of what has gone wrong, what is, what are the possible things that could go wrong. So I mean, whether that if it's achieved by having the general counsel as an invitee or as a permanent member, I think it's debatable. So long as, in my view, the objective is fulfilled, which is if you are able to be there and play a very sort of strategic role in terms of having a a meaningful discussion with the board, and I think they rely a lot on you for your judgment and wisdom. So I mean, if it's achieved by the purpose of either you're on the board or as an invitee, I think it's okay, so long as your objective is fulfilled.
Sure.
I'm sorry, I think earlier you had a question on cybersecurity as well, and I'm not sure I answered it fully. I just want to say that you're right. I mean, being a data-heavy company, this has been sort of identified as a big risk, and I think globally, I think even Deloitte came out with a report that cybersecurity is the biggest risk that companies face. So globally, we do have a chief cybersecurity officer, and we often face instances of data breach. So like I sort of mentioned earlier, there is a very strong security team who immediately sort of dive into these details, and it's kind of resolved at the quickest instance possible. But it's important for the GC to have visibility over what is the cybersecurity plan and what is being presented to the board and all of that. So we've been given trainings from a very broad level. So I thought I'll just touch upon that.
Absolutely, because I think when I was speaking to Mr. Lankapalli, who was supposed to be on our panel but couldn't make it, one of the things he mentioned was that when people come to him as a buyer of services, it's no longer just the GC or just the chief information officer of the chief technology officer of the company. It's clearly a group of people, teams. The team is made up of a whole bunch of people who are at the C-suite level, at the general manager level and role, and therefore there's nothing is implemented in the company without the ability of having the buy-in of all of the relevant stakeholders. Okay, so we're getting a 10-minute only sign up. So I think we could look at potentially closing this out. So let me ask you guys a last question. In your own sort of ways, what are X, Y, and Z? Saugata, I'll start with you.
For me, I define X, Y, Z. It's very clear for me. It's collaboration, which is the start of the topic. It's collaborate with everyone, business partners as well as within the team and the external world. Then comes innovation. The topic is you always have to innovate yourself. I mean, otherwise it's like stagnant is dead. So innovation in any form, could be technology, could be tools, could be disruptive technologies also. Now we're talking about AI and things like that. Could also be innovations like what you just now mentioned in the way you opine the topic. Could be as simple as that. Innovations could be like how you streamline processes. Innovation could be anything on that basis. And the third one is excellence. Excellence is a measure. It's a challenge to yourself. You put that again and again. And I think that these 3 bullets are actually a cycle. So collaborate, understand what's the need,
Sure.
innovate by the need, check the excellence, whether you have reached there or not, and then challenge yourself again to collaborate.
Set a higher goal for
Yeah,
yourself.
so you push yourself again and again and complete the cycle. And it's a never-ending process. It's a process for life.
Absolutely.
So that's why what I follow as a normal philosophy.
Excellent.
I think we mentioned, or I mentioned this earlier, which is that the XYZ is something which is very fluid,
Sure.
and will have to be sort of tweaked depending on, you know, the needs of the business and the needs of the need of the hour. So in my mind, the XYZ is, you know, just being a trusted advisor, a very strong, you know, risk manager, having a very strong risk spotter and a risk manager, and of course above all being a business enabler. I think it's also important in that context to just talk about the kind of roles that, you know, a GC is doing as opposed to the traditional role, which is that today GC is involved, I mean, like I think we spoke about in, you know, investigations. Today they're involved in, you know, like policy making, and today they're involved in external affairs. So these are facets which I think were not sort of, you know, foreseen in the traditional role as well. So I guess it's something which is very fluid and will keep evolving as per the need of the hour. So that's my view.
Thank you. So let me ask you a slightly different question, different sets of X, Y, and Z.
Sure.
We're seeing a trend of GCs actually moving to CEO roles.
Yep.
What are the X, Y, and Z for GCs to get to CEOs? This is, you know, for the next level of the conference, but let's sow the seeds right now.
Well, I think that's the logical conclusion in many respects, right? Maybe not CEO, but business leader or whatever. I mean, John Chambers, who is our chairman right now, has been our CEO for a long period of time, holds a JD, right? I don't think he has ever practiced law, to be honest, but Accenture, I forget the lady's name, but yeah, so she was, so she was a GC and then she moved, she runs North America for Accenture sales. We have several examples within Cisco of ladies. Interestingly, they're all ladies. Okay, so maybe there's something to do with the risk appetite of the guys, but who have moved over. And I'll do my little pitch here right now. The reason I'm hiring for India is because my lawyer decided to go and join sales, right? And so it's something we encourage. We think it's a good plan. We have people who have gone and then come back, right? And normally that helps you get a higher designation as well. But I think that's the logical place where you will go to, right? It's critical that you understand where you are, and to just, you know, kind of sum it up, the law department or the legal department of a company is the Switzerland of the corporate entity, right? You don't really have a play in it. You don't make money when the company makes more money. You might make more stocks or whatever, but generally speaking, you're not at the same hook, like you see nowadays with the finance organizations to play that role before. You see more and more the CFO being held responsible for the margins and the like. So they're being dragged into it. So it's critical you do your job from that perspective, but at the same time, I think, you know, not everybody's going to make GC, right? Let's be clear. So why not? Why don't you go try for a business role that might give you a different path going forward? So I definitely encourage it. I think it's the more lawyers I have who leave me and go and work in the business, better for me, right? Because then I don't need to even ask them for permission to do things. I can just go and slap them around a few times. Right?
Slightly different point of view, but okay. Sandhya, you have something to say?
So I think it's also a question if you want to be the CEO. I think
Of
more
course.
importantly. But I think lawyers are sort of best suited to be, and I've seen many lawyers in my earlier organization take on the role of chief risk officers, and actually I've seen many of them take on the role of chief of staff, and all actually ladies, you know, I would say. And I think that chief of staff again is interesting because that, you know, you're supposed to be the you know, eyes and ears of the CEO.
That's right.
So I mean, I just wanted to, you know, bring about that facet as well. I'm increasingly seeing a lot of GCs or lawyers actually take on the role of chief of staff, because then they really have, you know, full, again, by their training as a lawyer,
That's
they
exactly
have their,
correct.
you know, full
The ability
Yes.
to think ahead.
think ahead. I mean, they obviously are a
issues,
business
yeah.
enabler,
Yeah.
but then, you know, that whole-roundedness sort of
Absolutely.
gives them, you know, I think a good fit to be a chief of staff. But yeah, I mean, that's encouraging to hear your perspective.
Very good. Any further questions from the audience? Any points or comments? We're running out of time, but I'm sure we can take one or two questions.
There
Or
is
we're
one. Or it's completely
or
satisfactory.
I think, yeah. Okay, so clearly the panel has done an excellent job
We put them
in
to sleep.
defining the X, Y, and Z. You know, we all did law to stay away from math, but we had to deal with the X and Y and Z today. With that, we'll call the panel to a close. So thank you very much,
Thank you very
members
much.
of
Thank you.
the panel.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
If we can just stay on the dais for a couple of minutes, please. Thank you, Kosturi, and thank you, Saugata, Sandhya, and Navneet. Thank you very much. Personally, this panel discussion was something different, simply because the various new aspects of the working of the GC's office, which at least I would not come to know in the ordinary course, they brought up, and I think that was a fantastic sharing of certain intangible aspects of the GC's office, and I very much enjoyed the presentation made by each one of you. And thank you for Kosturi provoking the panelists to give their best. I thought it was extremely well conducted and very well articulated. In fact, I can say as a senior person, I'm very proud of each one of you. Thank you. And then